In 1986, a widow sat across from my desk with a bunch of bonds, paperwork showing a bunch of bonds paying what looked like great income. And I had to tell her that the money she was living on had already lost most of its value. She just hadn't been told that yet. By the end of this episode, I'm going to show you the 5-minute test that tells you if your portfolio is that widow right now. So stay with me because this is what we're going to do. So Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan Chase, one of the most powerful bankers on the planet, wrote something in his 2026 shareholder letter that most people scrolled past. He called persistent inflation the skunk at the party. And here's why that line matters. Dimon doesn't talk like that unless he's worried. And he's not the only one. Morgan Stanley's research desk is flagging stagflation right now, driven by energy shocks, slowing growth, and inflation that refuses to come down. UBS ran a survey of central bank reserve managers. Those are the people who literally manage every nation's money. And they asked them, what's the most likely economic scenario over the next 5 years? Know what they said? 52% said stagflation. That's up 39% from not long ago. That's not a fringe opinion. That's not a fringe opinion anymore. That's the majority. The people running the world's money supply are quietly getting their portfolios ready for something that most retail investors have never lived through and don't have a plan for. So today I want to explain exactly what that thing is, why it's different from anything you've ever experienced in the last 40 to 50 years, and by the end, give you some specific test that tells you whether you're exposed or not. So let's begin by defining what inflation is. Most people think they know what it is, but I don't think most people really know. Stagflation is when you get a stagnant, weak economy and stubborn rising inflation, all at the same time. Normally, those two don't happen together. A hot economy causes inflation. A cold economy kills inflation. Stagflation breaks the rule. And when it happens, the Fed's usual fix, raising interest rates, makes the weak economy even weaker without actually fixing the inflation. There's no clean lever to pull. Long-term rates rise, and so do short-term rates. And here's the part I really want you to sit with, because this is the part almost no one explains. Think about the Great Recession. Think about the Great Recession, 2008. What was it? It was like a heart attack. It was sudden. It was terrifying. Markets cratered in months. And then painfully, but relatively quickly, they recovered. It lasted from the end of 2007 to the middle of, not even the middle of 2009. That's a heart attack. Now think about the inflation spike from 2021 to 2024. What was that? It was like a fever. It spiked hard. Prices at the grocery store, at the gas pump, it hurt. And then, over a couple of years, it broke. The fever broke, and it came down. Stagflation is neither of those. Stagflation isn't a heart attack, and it's not a fever. Stagflation is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Doesn't crash. There's no single day you can point to. It grinds quietly for years, sometimes for over a decade, or your purchasing power just bleeds. And because there's no single dramatic moment, most people don't react to it until the damage is already done. There's no news alert for you that says you've now lost 40% of your purchasing power. It just happens. One cut at a time, until one day you look at your bank account and can't explain where the last decade went. That's why it's different from the crash of '08 and different from the inflation spike you just lived through. Those had a clear beginning and a clear end, and it didn't last long. But here's the good news. The bad and the bad news. The bad news is that it's already happened in this country. The good news means we don't have to guess what it looks like. From 1966 to 1982, 16 years, the US went through exactly this. Cost push inflation, wage price spirals, oil shocks stacked on top of a weak economy. Over that stretch, the dollar lost 70% of its purchasing power. What cost you $1 in 1960 cost about $3 by 1980. Let me make it clear. Let me make it really clear. In 1960, a first-class stamp was 4 cents. A Coke was a dime. A dozen eggs, 57 cents. And a gallon of milk, 49 cents. By 1980, that stamp was 15 cents, almost 4 times. A Coke was 35 cents, up 3.5 times. A dozen eggs had almost doubled to 91 cents. And a gallon of milk, fourfold to $2.16. Now let's do the math going forward from where we are right now. If that same 16-year period repeated, eggs that feel expensive at $6 a dozen today could look cheap next to $28. A $4.15 gallon of milk could cost $15. A $3 loaf of bread could push past $14. I know how that sounds, almost unimaginable. But if you just lived through 2021 and 22 when prices jumped hard in about 2 years, now stretch that same intensity, not to 2 years, but 16. That's the environment we're talking about, not a spike, a grind. So I told you at the very beginning about the widow who came to see me in 1986. Let me finish the story, because that's the whole reason this topic matters to me personally, not just professionally. Her husband passed away in 1978. He left her insurance proceeds and a bunch of bonds. The kind of setup that on paper looks like it means she's set for life. Steady income, safe assets, nothing to worry about. But between 1978 and 1986, 8 years, the purchasing power of that income had quietly fallen somewhere between 40 and 70%. Her old bonds, the ones that were paying double-digit interest, kept being maturing, and called away. And every time one matured, it got replaced with not with a double-digit bond, with something paying 5 or maybe 6%. She wasn't just earning less, she was living on less. Every single year, getting a little poorer without ever making a single bad decision. Nobody sat her down in 1978 and said, here's what's about to happen to you. It's going to happen over the next 8 years. No, it just happened to her quietly, grinding, the way it happens to almost everyone in this environment. And here's what we did. We moved her out of those bonds into equities, into ownership of real businesses, and focused equities, not an index fund, but really focused equities, which could deal with whatever situation was there. And the widow passed away in 2010. It was 24 years after she came to me, and in all that time, her quality of life never went down. Her income kept rising the entire time. It's not an automatic outcome. It's not what happens if you just sit still and hope. It's what happens with a portfolio which gets built on purpose, on time, for exactly this risk. The difference between those two outcomes, quietly losing half your purchasing power or having a rising income for 24 years, that difference of conversation, one conversation, had early enough. Think about it. 60% of Americans are already cutting back on food or medicine or entertainment or other purchases. That's the definition of an economy going backward, an economy recessing. It's in recession. On the other side, think of what you're seeing at the grocery store and the gas pump and the pharmacy and your medical premiums. That's inflation. The two combined, stagflation, slow and persistent. Not much today, a little more tomorrow, a little more in the day after that, and a little more after that. It's dying by 1,000 paper cuts. It's the skunk in the room. And now I want to divert for a second. I'm going to zoom out because stagflation doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from something specific. And I think most people have no idea how big this number actually is. US government debt right now stands at $39 trillion. But worldwide, total worldwide debt is 353 trillion. 353 trillion. And that's against $105 trillion in global GDP. The global economy is 105 trillion. The global debt, 353. That's global debt running roughly 350% of global GDP. Six of the G7 nations, the largest economies on earth, now carry a debt above 100% of their GDP. Japan sits at 255%. Italy, 139%. Our country, 123%. France, 111%. Canada, 104%, and the United Kingdom, 101%. There are now 54 nations on the edge of a financial crisis. 23 of them already defaulted and are standing on the razor's edge of it. And if you're hearing the noise in the background, those are the Blue Angels because it's Seafair weekend in Seattle. So those are the Blue Angels flying over, just to let you know. Back to this. This is the debt that's behind it. 54 nations right now on the edge of financial crisis. And look at the G7 nations and what they're carrying. Here's the part that matters most. There are only 5 ways that a country climbs out from under debt like that. They can grow the economy faster than the debt. They can raise taxes. They can cut spending like Social Security and healthcare and the safety net. They can inflate the currency so debt gets repaid in cheaper dollars. Or they can default outright. Realistically, only 2 of those 5 are politically survivable at scale. Inflation and default. Nobody's tripling GDP overnight. Nobody's cutting Social Security enough to matter. So heavily indebted nations lean toward default, the same way Greece did about a decade ago. And nations with what looks like manageable debt lean toward the other option, printing enough money to inflate their way out. Either path leads to the same place for you and me, a long, grinding erosion of what our money is actually worth. Now, here's what I want to flip to. Because I don't want you walking away from this episode feeling like there's nothing you can do. It's not true. There's a lot you can do. There just isn't a lot of time to figure it out. Remember, I told you I'd come back to that 5-minute test. But first, one more piece of history because it's the most important one. During that same time, during that same inflation time, during those 16 years, 1966 to 1982, the one everyone remembers as brutal, some investments didn't just survive, they exploded. $100,000 in McDonald's, which came public in 1966, grew to $1 million by 1982, a tenfold increase. Nobody believed in 1966 a 19-cent hamburger stand where nobody could sit down and eat would become what it became. $100,000 invested in Aero Electronics. It was a used radio repair shop in Colorado. $100,000 grew to over $2 million by 1981. They bet early on the transistor, 20-fold increase. And advanced micro devices actually fell from $30 a share down to $10 by 1972. And if you panicked and sold that 70% drawdown, you missed the run to 300 a share by 1981, 30-fold increase, and over 1,700 by 1984. Stagflation isn't a death sentence for every dollar you own. It's a death sentence for cash sitting still, for long-term bonds that can't keep up. It rewards ownership in the right businesses and the discipline to hold them through the scary parts. It's owning the right businesses, not an index of stocks, but the right business. And that's the whole game. Okay, I told you I'd get to it, so here it is. Ask yourself 3 questions right now in the next 5 minutes. Question 1, if inflation ran at 1970s level for the next 10 years, not the mild inflation of the last couple of years, but the real thing, would your current income still cover your life? Or does it only work because prices have stayed roughly where they are? Question 2, how much of what you own is sitting in cash or CDs or annuities, the exact assets that got completely destroyed between 1966 and 1982? Because those are the ones that do nothing to protect you right now in stagflation. And question 3, and this is the big one, has anyone actually built your portfolio? Have you built your portfolio? Has an advisor built your portfolio on purpose for a slow grind, decade-long inflation scenario? Not for last year's headlines, for the real thing. Or is it just sitting there hoping? If you hesitated on any one of those 3 questions, even for a second, that hesitation is your answer. That's the widow in 1986, before anyone told her what was happening. That was the widow in 1978, before anyone let her know what was coming. And here's the truth. Nobody wants to hear. Stagflation doesn't send a warning shot. There's no siren, no single crash to react to. By the time it's obvious, by the time it's on every news channel, a portfolio built the old way has already quietly lost a decade of purchasing power. One paper cut at a time. And paper cuts don't feel like much, one at a time. That's exactly the problem. But I want to leave you with the other half of the widow's story because it's the half that matters. She didn't fix this herself. She didn't read an article and figure it out alone at the kitchen table. She sat down one time with someone who could look over exactly what she owned and tell her exactly what it would do to her over the next 20 years, and then change it before it was too late. That's the conversation I want to have with you. Not a sales pitch, not a product, one sit down, where we run over your actual portfolio through this exact scenario, the real 1966 to 1982 kind of environment, not a soft theoretical one, and I will show you in black and white where you're exposed and where you're not. And sometimes it takes longer than half an hour. I realized that through a couple calls. Here's what I want you to do the second this episode ends. Don't add it to a list. Don't tell yourself you'll get to it next month. Go to the website or go click on my calendar and set up a time for a portfolio review. Cost you nothing. Takes less time than this episode did. The widow in 1986 didn't know what happened to her until she was already 8 years into it. You have something she didn't have. You just heard this episode. You know exactly what's coming. You know exactly what to do about it. The only question left is whether you make that call today or whether you're still sitting on cash or bonds 10 years from now, wondering why the annuity doesn't buy today or in the future what it did today. I'm Mike Adams, and this has been the 1,000 Paper Cut Economy. I'll see you at the desk. And with that, let me ask if there's any questions.